Hi everybody and welcome back to Sociology. Today we're going to be talking about class. Now class is a difficult concept to explain to Americans because by and large America is supposed to be a classless society. Okay, we're not exactly delineated on class like some other cultures. In fact, most other cultures in the history of time have ever been. So let's start off with the definition. Uh, Class is a social construct that groups people within a society based on a variety of socioeconomic factors. Now, I cheated a little bit right there because I said a variety of socioeconomic factors. That's because there are many different ways that you can differentiate classes within a society. And we're going to cover those just in a sec. But here's another definition. It's called social stratification. Social stratification is essentially the layering of classes within a society. All right, so perhaps in America you might think of upper, middle, and lower classes. Those are stratified layers within a society. Okay, um, and that's in a hierarchical structure, so that those with more money and power, say upper, you would have more power. All right, so it's not classes that would be side by side as such. Okay, there's a layering. Okay, in stratification, and that's the people with more have more, and then others have less. In America, we say things like upper, lower, or middle. Okay, or upper middle or lower middle, and these terms don't necessarily have or carry much meaning. When in some other societies, we'll see later, they can carry a lot of meaning. All right, but just for the start, um, to know that Americans have a very vague concept of class. Um, you may be thinking of tax brackets in terms of upper and lower middle, and governments do have definitions for those different tax brackets, but that's simply just a tax bracket, how much percentage you would pay in taxes, and not necessarily a class. All right, so when we say things like upper class, um, those are very gray areas. Okay, and what exactly we're talking about. Okay, remember it's a social construct, so that just means that it's agreed upon in society. One of the major factors most societies have ever used when talking about class structure is heredity. Okay, so the question is generally what family were you born into? Okay, who were your parents? Usually, specifically, who was your father? Okay, um, in a patriarchal society, which most are. So the question was, who was your father in terms of will you be getting a job, or will you be um, even granted an interview? Okay, or you even able to talk to this person? The number one throughout history has been heredity, and that was what family you were born into. I don't know if any of you guys are Harry Potter fans, but it's a nice little way of explaining it in that the writer of the Harry Potter series was British. Now, British people are very familiar with, and most Europeans, very familiar with class structures. Okay, it was when you have nobility and royalty and these types of things, class determined a huge portion of your life path. Okay, what would happen to you in your life? She was initially writing that for a British audience. She didn't know it'd be a worldwide phenomenon. So there was a lot of class messaging in those books, specifically in the beginning. So um, you may, if you were to think in America, like who gets service in a retail store first? As an American, you probably say something along the lines of first come, first serve. If you're here first, that would mean you're entitled to first service. Okay, that would be an argument you would make. I was here first. By and large, that is a very American concept, way of thinking about service. Traditionally, it had nothing to do with who was there first. It had who was there as the highest rank. So there's a scene early on when they're buying wands, okay, and the people that were there first will step aside when someone of higher rank comes. Now her audience would have responded and understood that very clearly. Um, Whereas if you weren't familiar with class so much, it may just have seemed like a jerk move that they would wait. But to a class-based society that was familiar with that, it made perfect sense. Okay, so heredity is the major factor for determining class throughout history. But as I said, in America, although we claim to be a classless society, there are many aspects of class which can play a very powerful role in your future and your life path as well. All right. So just to name a few, a major one could be considered education. All right. So that if you become educated, you can perceive a higher class level. Now, what exactly does class do for you, and what doesn't it do? Okay, class may or may not determine if you get a job, but class would help you get an interview, for instance. Okay, so an easy way to actually think about how class is functions in America is if you were to call for an interview or apply, what type of treatment would you expect? Or if you were to deal something like with law enforcement, what type of uh, treatment would you expect? You can think of it like, if they have questions for you, will they be kicking in your door? Will they be knocking loudly? Will they be knocking politely? Or will they actually call your lawyer first because they have questions? Those are all different ways that they might actually have deal with you if you have a question. Depending on your class, which relates to your power and your socioeconomic status, you will perhaps receive different treatment. Similarly in sentencing, okay, or just in the course in general, if the judge feels that you can be a valuable member of society and that your class is elevated, they may not throw the book at you, okay? Whereas if they think that you may not have value to society, lower class, now you're going to getting the full sentencing. All right, so that's just an easy way to think about, or like I said before about applying for jobs or getting interviews. What type of treatment will you expect? If you walk into a restaurant, okay, or country club, or a retail store, what type of treatment will you expect? And people, we make judgments based on this. Now, people won't know your education, okay, but things such as language, which goes with education, may influence how people react to you, okay? In that if, you speak in a certain way using slang, which you should not do if you are trying to get a job, okay? Because in Western society, there is a established language of communication, okay? There's established dress codes. There's another one would be actually hygiene. We could jump right to that, okay? To think about hygiene, if you were hiring somebody, hygiene would be a major factor in hiring or not, okay? Now you can't say, well, this is my hygiene, like it. Western business society and globalization, world business society prefers your hygiene a certain way. They also prefer communication in a certain way, okay? So in the eyes of people like this, your class would be elevated. Whether it's right or wrong is irrelevant. Education, so that goes along with language. But I mean, for instance, if you're in front of a judge, I hope that doesn't happen, your lawyer will be mentioning that you are either have attained a degree or are in the process of attaining a degree. It doesn't sound like that should really change your treatment from the legal system. But in the eyes of the judge, it would say, well, this person's trying to better themselves. Okay, I might give them the benefit of the doubt. All right, again, you would say their class perhaps is elevated. So these are so we've got so far heredity, education, language, hygiene. Hobbies are certainly one. Okay, so these are the ways you spend your time. All right, and you can you call them stereotypes or patterns depending on how you feel about that. But even in terms of racing, like racing things, you could say that those are class. They at least have a flavor of class. So if you guys know what the America's Cup is yachting. Okay, it's a huge yacht race. All right, to yacht, you need to have a lot of money. All right, so that would lend itself to a particular clientele. Formula One racing, F1 racing is racing. Okay, but those cars cost $750,000. NASCAR, okay, stock cars are still expensive, but not quite as expensive as at Formula One. And then you go all the way down to essentially demolition derby, which would be anything that runs with an engine. All right, you can see how these hobbies attract different types of people. Okay, socioeconomic groups of people. Similar like the costs could be considered. But then there's all types of sports or hobbies or beverages or foods or clothing, pastimes, forms of entertainment. All of these can you could say either whether it's cause or effect, have some sort of relationship to the class that you are in. All right. A couple other ones would be occupation. Okay. Occupation can very much determine your class or how you will be treated in such a way. Wealth and income. Wealth is how much you are worth. Income is how much you make. Okay, these can also have an influence on class. But they, again, because there's no clearly defined answers or definitions in America, it's not exactly always easy to say. Think about the Pope. The Pope has no income and no net worth, but his education, excuse me, his occupation is such that when he goes to England, he stays in Buckingham Palace. Okay, even though his wealth is zero. All right, so it's not necessarily just your wealth, or it's not necessarily just your income, or it's not necessarily just your occupation. All these things play different roles in this. Okay, now another interesting thing to think about is called social mobility. Now, social mobility is individual's ability, or groups, family's ability, for all that matter, to change groups within a society. So remember those stratifications. That's when you can either gain a level through education, or gain a level. It sounds like it's a game, but that's kind of how we talk about it. Through education, or wealthing, or income, or heredity. Okay, although you can't really affect heredity, you could be married into it. I guess that would count, and certainly. Some societies have the ability to change classes, and others are extremely rigid. A lot of people that came to America, and I'm talking about the people that came to America willingly, came to America to avoid the class-based structure systems of most of the other countries of the world, where they had very little to no social mobility, and that they could not change classes. America was very good in ignoring this roadblock to a lot of people's success. Okay, so the people that decided to come to America were coming for opportunity, and the class-based system restricted. All right, again, the people that came here willingly. When talking about social mobility, the most rigid one that we can ever talk about, and it's interesting to look at in terms of how strict it can be, is called the caste system. And there's a number of different caste systems throughout the world, and there have been throughout history. The most perhaps infamous one right now is currently in India. It's called the caste system, and it has, interestingly, 5 people, but only 4 castes. And the reason for this is because the Brahmin, soldiers, priests, and I'm generalizing here, and merchants, laborers, and then it's subgroups, and it's extremely complicated. This is the short version. But those 4 groups of people are in what's known as castes, and they can basically only obtain jobs within that caste. They can only marry within that same group. I said there's 5 groups of people because I left out something called the Dalits, or the Untouchables, which is they're often commonly known. They are a group of people, and from an outsider you could think of it as a caste. But in a lot of people's eyes, they are so low that it's not a caste. It's a casteless. You are not even quite a person. Okay, which is objectionable from the outside, certainly. But because it's such a strong part of their religion, despite the fact of the caste system being illegal, it persists. And I've heard different numbers, 150, 200 million people who are casteless and cannot change their class system. I said there's no way to change. However, there is one way, and that is to actually die and reincarnate. Okay, but you've got to be good. Which makes it a very strong social control device, in that you've got a whole group of people that really, really want to be good, and if they believe that, then they have a strong motivation for behaving. Okay, and then you've got 1/5 of your people, or perhaps more, who are stuck at the bottom. By the way, they're also a democracy, which is another fascinating aspect. Okay, that was a quick little primer on class. See you guys.